tell you, it was a pretty straight liability case. It was a head-on collision between a U-Haul, a vehicle operated by a U-Haul employee and our client. But this is the bad fact. Our client weighed 500 pounds. He had a shattered knee. So if you look at his knee, his massive leg, it had a big sort of gorge in it from all the tissue that had gone. It was almost down to the bone. And the doctor said, you're never going to get this osteomyelitis out of control. You either have to be on antibiotics for life, but you can't because your body eventually develops immunity to it, so you're going to have to get it amputated.
All right, everybody, welcome to another great episode of Cases Gone Wild, brought to you by me, Jon Marko, and Marko Law. I'm your host, Jon Marko. I'm a trial attorney. I've been litigating for about 15 years, and on this show, I bring you the craziest, wildest, most insane cases that you just won't believe. And today, we have a very special guest, a great, worldwide recognized trial lawyer, a great friend, a great human being, a great all-around person originally from Michigan, Haytham Faraj. Haytham, thank you for joining us. Good to see you, my brother.
Nice to see you, John. I miss you, brother.
I miss you too. And you are filming. Thank you for joining us. But I understand you are actually in Lebanon right now.
I am. We decided, my wife and I decided to do a year abroad. Soon after we arrived, war broke out, and we found ourselves in a unique position to do some relief work. So I've put together a group of people. We have a system where we're feeding or providing, not feeding, between 10 and 15,000, providing 10 and 15,000 meals a week. We managed to put people in shelters to help people get medical aid, and so it feels good. It's a good way to give back.
You're an inspiration, man. I don't know how you do it all. Tell our listeners a little bit about you and how you started here in Michigan, right? And you were in Chicago. And tell our listeners about how you became one of the greatest trial lawyers in the country.
Well, I appreciate the label. I think I'm just a great. I want to say I'm a great lawyer or a great trial lawyer, but I'm in a community of great trial lawyers like you and others that you've had on your show. So I don't know that I'm unique. I've just had some good cases and the support of good friends, and we've had some great results. So I appreciate the label. It's good to be friends with great trial lawyers like you.
It's true, though. It's true.
But I did start in Michigan. I retired from the Marine Corps after 22 years. I was a combat arms commander. Then I became a lawyer in the Marine Corps, a JAG. I did a bunch of high-profile war crimes cases.
And so our listeners know JAG is where you to tell our listeners what JAG is, so they understand.
JAG is a short word for Judge Advocate General, and that's what lawyers are called in the Marine Corps. Well, in the armed forces. But Navy and Marine Corps definitely label them as JAGs. And so I was a Marine Corps lawyer. I spent the bulk of my time as a combat arms officer. I was a platoon commander, a company commander. Then I became a special operations, an operations officer for a special operations unit called Anglico. And then after that, I decided I wanted to do something long-term after the Marine Corps. So I applied for a special program the Marine Corps has that allows a handful of officers every year to become lawyers. They made the mistake of accepting me, and I came back and raised hell defending Marines accused of various, allegations or crimes, whatever you have you.
And when you defend these, do you defend them? It's not like in the normal court system with a jury, right? It's in the military courts, right?
Yeah, it's a military court, but it has a jury. This is going to sound crazy. So the military, the commander prosecutes, right? The commander of the unit prosecutes, and there's a
His own
prosecutor.
people?
Yeah, the commander of the unit prosecutes is responsible. The commander of the unit is called the convening authority, usually the general officer, if it's a general court martial, which is the equivalent of a felony. So if it's a felony, it's a general court martial. And a general court martial means the general convened the court martial. Um, that's where the term general court martial comes from. And so a general convenes the court martial, and he appoints a prosecutor who prosecutes the case. He doesn't appoint a defense lawyer because they don't want to have sort of unlawful authority over an officer who may be getting raided by the general. So they just the defense service stands alone, but the court martial is convened by the officer, and then yeah, he appoints the prosecutor, but he also hand selects the jury. So the person prosecuting your client picks the jury, and you get one preemptory challenge.
How is that fair?
You're supposed to
And
get
is
unlimited cause challenges, liberal cause challenges, but you've tried enough criminal case. I think you've tried criminal cases, haven't you?
yes, with Jeffrey Feiger, we went and Nick
Yeah.
Rowley
So
even. Yeah.
yeah. So sometimes judges follow the law, and sometimes they don't. And so sometimes you're challenging someone for a cause, and the judge disagrees with you, and you're like, how can you not agree with me? And I don't have any preemptories
Yeah.
left.
Now, are these jurors from the military as well?
Yeah,
Are
they're
they
from the same
servicemen?
unit. They're from the same unit.
Okay.
Yeah,
So what if wow, that's kind of crazy. I didn't realize that.
yeah.
So it's like, hey, if you were a jerk to that guy, you hopefully don't have him on your jury, right? It's like, you know,
Yeah, well, there's the system is supposed to be, they ask the same questions you would ask in a civilian trial. Does anyone here know the defendant? Does anyone here know any of the witnesses? Do you know the prosecutor? And the jurors are required by law to all be senior in rank to the person being prosecuted. So usually you don't have those types of personnel, interpersonal conflicts, because a senior person is not going to have a conflict with a junior in the military. But
sure,
but it could happen.
sure. So after and thank you for your service, Haytham, a long
Thank
time of service. After your service, tell the jury like where or the jury tell our listeners can't get it out of my brain. Tell our listeners, what happened. Where take us through your career to
Yeah, so I left and I came to Michigan because I wanted to be in the Midwest. That's where, I have a love in my heart for the Midwest. I finished my years in California, and I spent most of my time in California, but I have to be candid, California never felt like home. It's a beautiful place to live, but it's kind of it's a sprawl. People aren't close to one another, and so I decided to come to Michigan. Um, and I began to do federal criminal defense, and I tried a bunch of cases in the Eastern District of Michigan. Um, I tried a couple of cases in the circuit court downtown, and then I decided I wanted to do more civil work. And I'm friends with Nick Rowley, just like you're friends with Nick Rowley, and I knew Nick. I've known Nick since 2009. Um, I retired in 2008. I met Nick in 2009, but we hit it off, but we didn't do any work together. In 2011, he came to visit me in Michigan, and I think it was around the time. It may have been around the time that the Feiger trial was happening, actually, when Jerry. May have been 2010. I don't remember, but yeah, I think you remember that.
yeah.
That
Yeah. That's
and
when I met
so
him too.
yeah, so he stayed at my house, and I was talking about doing civil work, and he began to encourage me, and so I decided I was going to get into civil work. The problem, of course, with civil work, and you're a master of it in Michigan, but for most of us ordinary people, Michigan has terrible laws for PI, and so
Right.
I dabbled in it a little bit, but I was also licensed in Illinois, so that's why I opened an office in Illinois and began to take on cases in Illinois.
Were you in
And
Chicago or?
and I still have an office in Chicago. Actually, I opened an office in Chicago, and we still have an office in Chicago. In 2016, or late 2015, I decided to move to LA. I joined up with Nick Rowley and another friend, Joey Lowe. I think you know him.
Yeah,
And
great lawyers.
yes, and moved to California, and we were, I was taking on some cases, getting more experience, and that's the story. So I kept the office in Chicago. I closed up the office in Michigan, and now I'm between California and Michigan. I mean,
And
California and Illinois.
and you have just achieved phenomenal results. I mean, when we just so our listeners know, I mean, you are among, if not the top of the top of the top of the trial lawyers in the United States. I can say that anywhere in the world. And so I have so much respect for you. And I want to talk about some of these groundbreaking cases and your strategies and how these were crazy cases. What do you want to start with, Haytham? I know you've had so many.
Well, I will say this, John. If you probably know our market as well as anybody, I don't market, and so all of my cases come from other lawyers. I'm very careful in making sure that I like the case. So I'm fortunate to be able to do all sorts of cases, and that's by design because I get bored easily. I can't just go and do, the car crash case after car crash case because
Right.
I get bored. And so I've been fortunate to have done all sorts of cases. And I think because I try to cast a wide net, I really work hard to learn and to understand the issues in the case or the story of the case. You can start with let's start with the most recent one. I think the Mormon case was the most recent one.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us. And by the way, I met you at, I believe it was Jerry Spence's ranch or at one of the Jerry Spence things. You're a graduate of the Jerry Spence trial lawyers community. And so I just, discovering the story when you talk about that is one of the most important things that I think is often overlooked. They say, okay, I hear lawyers say, well, let's look at the case. It's, here are the facts, here's the law, how much is the case worth, without really discovering the story of the case, which I think is a huge mistake and that you've been able to do so well. Tell us the story about the Mormon case. Where was it? What happened? What went wild?
Yeah, so you want to talk about crazy stories. This was probably the craziest. I'm sure I could come up with others, but it's the most recent. Gus Mormon is a young 29-year-old who he has an ordinary life and as the son of dairy farmers in Iowa. He's a hardworking guy, and if you've ever been on a dairy farm and understand the work that has to go into it, this is part of the story. You'll learn that these are some of the hardest working farmers. Unlike most farmers, dairy farmers can almost never leave because they got to take care of the animals. So you can plant your seeds and you can wait for them to grow. And there's other work. I'm not diminishing other farming in any way, but dairy farmers, there is no break. I mean, these animals you got to get up at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. You got to feed the animals. You got to clean up after the animals. You got to milk them. This was a mechanical operation. You got to transport the milk and on and on and on. And so he was the son of very hardworking people from the town of Manchester, which is in the middle of nowhere in Iowa. Very ordinary life. Played football in high school. He was a jock. And at some point, his life takes a turn for the worst, and he begins to do meth. Turns out that he had a mental health disorder. He was bipolar and schizophrenic, and they kind of go hand in hand. If you've had those
Right.
kinds of clients, almost every civil rights case I have, the victim is bipolar, schizophrenic, and then meth goes along with it.
Right. Right.
And so Gus, he's in and out of rehab. His parents are trying to get him under control. One day,
And how old is he, Haytham?
he's 29. One day, he's driving his motorcycle, his Harley, along an Iowa highway, and the Iowa State Police tags him at 120, no, 100 and, yeah, 120 miles, no, 102 miles an hour at that point. And so they begin to give chase, and Gus is just kind of, still going. He won't stop, and now there's several police cars. They call to the town, city of Manchester, and now the city of Manchester is going chase. And then Gus takes a ramp to exit, and now he's headed into town, into the town of Manchester. And just to
Small
give you an
town, I'm assuming. Like,
yeah, yeah, I stayed there for trial, and I shit you not, uh, for dinner, I couldn't find a place. There isn't a restaurant in there that had fresh green salads, right? It's all
yeah.
just kind of the fast food. I mean, that kind of town. Great people, down to earth. I'll tell you the crazy story of Wadir. But it's just a very small farming town. Everyone knows everyone. And so he's going through town, and the Iowa State Police says, we're gonna break off the chase. This guy isn't wanted. He's just speeding. But but a Manchester State Police lieutenant decides, I'm going to continue to chase. And he chases Gus through the town. Gus gets out of town. He's now on a country road and out on town. And contact between the motorcycle and the cruiser happens. And the contact is to the back of the cruiser, right?
What do you mean? I don't get it. The cruiser hit him, or he hit the cruiser, or what?
Well, that's what we couldn't figure out. But the contact is to the back of the cruiser. And so the
And how do
police
you know?
officer,
There's like a mark on the back of
yeah,
the
there's a
cruiser or
mark.
something.
There's a black mark on the back of the cruiser.
But wasn't the cruiser behind the
Yeah.
motorcycle guy?
Yeah. And so the officer says, look, I was chasing it. I was going after him fast, trying to catch up. Then he begins to slow down. And so to avoid contact, I went around him on the left side. And then he accelerated into me when I went around him, and he lost control. Gus loses control, suffers a broken neck, and dies 33 days later.
Did he ever give a statement about what happened or
No
anything?
statement. No statement. But this was interesting. At the hospital, his mom says, did the police run you off the road? And he blinks his eye. And she says, that's a yes. And now get into the challenges of hearsay, right?
Oh my
And,
gosh.
you know,
You got to be kidding me. And this is a problem with these police cases too, especially when you have a death, is, it's like dead men tell no tales. That's like the Johnny
right,
Depp, the movie, but it's
right.
true. You have a dead client, they can't tell you what happened, and then you have the person you're suing, in this case the police, I'm assuming, who are the only account of the story, knowing that they're being sued. Or it could be in trouble.
Yeah, and our guy happened to be, Lieutenant Wessels, who everybody liked. He's been on the force for 30 years. By the time the case goes to trial, he's now retired.
Was it in
Everyone on the
federal
jury,
court?
no, it was state court. Everyone on the jury knows him. Everybody knows him or of him,
No
right?
way.
And everybody and maybe 80% of the jurors know the Mormons. They know that they're a family. They live outside town, but it's just that small of a town. It's
Wow.
if you don't know the person personally, you know of them, and so you weren't going to kick anybody off just because they knew someone. But the case goes to trial, and of course, they prosecuted Gus. He was high on meth. The paramedics said he smelled reeked of alcohol. The chase went through the town at 2:30 exactly. School let out at 2:15, and so you had that prejudice or bias, inflaming the jury about going 80, 90 miles an hour through town with kids just being let out of school. And then you had the matter of the contact with the back of the vehicle, which was consistent with what Wessel said, that he accelerated into me. Now, accelerated into me also could be that I slowed down, forcing him to make contact. That was our theory.
Right. That he
We
broke, like drove in front of
Yeah,
him and then broke.
and that's what I
This
think
sounds like
happened.
a tough case, Haytham. I'm
Yeah,
going to tell you, this sounds like a really tough case for lawyers listening, anybody listening.
it was a very tough case. When I add this, there was no video. So every cruiser has video. Wessels decided to turn his off.
Intentionally?
He says we think he shut it off, but he says I'm a lieutenant, and so I was in the office, and so because this thing runs on battery, when the car is turned off, after a certain time, the camera shuts off by itself, and when you turn it back on, the auto doesn't work. You have to physically turn it on. And he says, I forgot to turn it on, which was plausible, and we couldn't, challenge it. We think he turned
Right.
his camera off, but we weren't going to get the spoliation instruction on that one
Sure.
because he says, I just forgot to turn it on. But anyway, there's all sorts of video except from that cruiser. So they played the video of Gus going 102 miles an hour. They played the video of Gus going 70 miles an hour. They played the video of Gus making crazy maneuvers through the town, but we had no video of the contact. And what I did is I built models. During the deposition, I tried to get Wessels to explain to me what happened, and he couldn't. It didn't make sense what he was saying, right? There's no reason to be getting in front of someone that you're chasing, and once you pass someone, there's no reason to slow down unless you're trying to stop them.
Right.
And of course, common sense would dictate that someone on a motorcycle would not accelerate into a vehicle unless you've got a death wish. And
Right.
we didn't have any information that Gus had a death wish. In fact, his maneuvering was superb, and that's what they put up the videos to show how reckless he was, and I tried to use those bad videos, that bad evidence, to show how skillful he was on a motorcycle, even though they claimed he was intoxicated. Uh, I think the jury didn't believe he was intoxicated because the blood labs came back zero from the
Oh,
hospital.
wow. Yeah.
But there was meth. Make a long story short, I think what won the case is I literally built the road, and I bought a, a perfect sample of the Harley Davidson, the police car, and I tried to get Wessels in front of the jury to try and show what happened. And of course, he couldn't because it didn't make any sense. And the statement he had originally given was, he was very fixed in how it occurred, but at trial, he kept saying, I don't remember, I don't remember. And then he wouldn't agree to his own statement because on some level, his statement was consistent with what I was saying. That, along with some data from his car, which showed the speeds at different times, I was able to tell the story in a way that persuaded the jury. It sounds great now, but when I finished the closing, this was a referred case from a friend of mine in Iowa. I'm also licensed in Iowa. I got in the car, and I didn't want to wait for the jury to come back because I called my wife and said, I'm pretty sure that they're going to come back for the defense, and I wouldn't blame them.
Wow. So what happened? What was the verdict in the
They
case?
came back with a verdict of $4.26 million.
Wow.
There was never any serious offer of more than 500, I think, and that was right before trial. Um, so it was a big win. I know the numbers aren't huge, not as big as some of the other cases I've won, but given the liability issues in the case, it was pretty big.
Oh, yeah. It's not always about the number, it's about the result for your client. And, some of my toughest cases have not been the biggest numbered cases, but I feel like we did really well. Let me ask you, was it intimidating? Was it difficult to be kind of going into this small court in the middle of small town Iowa and representing this man and his family? And tell us a little bit about that.
First, let me say that we had a terrific judge. I mean, he was a consummate professional. He did his best to give both sides a fair trial. So that wasn't the challenge. But what you're talking about is very real, and I knew that would be a challenge for me. And so I visited Manchester no less than 3 times, 4 times. I decided to do the depositions of the various witnesses in person in Manchester. Um, the police department picked the fire department, and so I slept there. I walked the town just to get the feel for it. People weren't going to get to know me, but I wanted to get to know the town.
Right.
I visited the farm, met all the cousins. Probably 30 people showed up on Cousins Day. We sat and chatted, and they told me stories about Gus, and they cried and they laughed. It was like a memorial service. And then I had them walk me through their dairy operation because I wanted to understand. It was a small part of the case, but I needed to get to understand who these people are,
You're
right?
discovering
So
the story that a lot of lawyers will not take the time to do.
yeah, I am. I mean, it really is important. You're discovering it not by just talking about it, but by experiencing it, right? I drove the road that Gus drove. I drove the same route that Gus drove. Uh, I deposed the Iowa State Patrol officers, and I found things in common with them. They were kind of disinterested witnesses. They hadn't done anything wrong. They're the ones that broke off the chase, and so I developed some rapport with them so that when they got called in trial, they're not feeling like I'm trying to get them in trouble. In fact, I used them as a model for how police officers are supposed to behave. I ate in the town, I slept in the town, and so that helped me get 50% of the way towards being more comfortable in this alien environment that I wasn't
Right.
familiar with.
What
And
about
and
the
look,
defense attorney?
he wasn't from there. Also, he was from Iowa, but he wasn't from that town. They'll play we're from Iowa and this and that, and but look, these I got to tell you something for your listeners. I love trying cases in rural America. I love trying cases in rural America in California, in Illinois, in Iowa, where I've tried rural cases, in Michigan. Uh, People are kind, they are accepting, they have values that I understand, and we too often refer to people in generalities, and we want to label people based on how they vote, and to me that doesn't tell me anything. That's profiling, and it doesn't work. In my voir dires, I hardly ever use preemptory challenges because it's a shot in the dark unless I want to cause challenge and the judge doesn't give it to me, and so here's a practice I do before I start a trial. I know you've had Nick on, and I think Nick does something similar. I will, a couple of weeks before the trial starts, after I've visited the town and got a feel for where I'm going to be, I will begin to meditate about the people that are going to show up. And I begin to think about them as human beings, as my neighbors, as my friends, as people who I love. And I don't know them yet, but I imagine who they're going to be. They don't have to have identities. And I begin to train myself to feel love or a connection for these people, not because they've done something for me, but because they're going to. They're going to sacrifice their time. They're going to sacrifice financially. They're going to sacrifice mentally as they struggle to come to the right decision. They're going to be placed oftentimes on the horns of moral dilemmas. Who do I go with, this person or that person? That's asking a lot from a total stranger. And so when you go through all of that, you really begin to feel this emotional connection. And from there springs a genuine expression of gratitude at the beginning of every trial. When I say good morning to them, when I say good afternoon, after every session, I make sure I address them, right? I don't care what anybody says. I will look to the jury before, the first time I get up to examine, direct or cross, I will look at the jury and say good morning, good afternoon throughout the trial. I'll express my gratitude to them at the beginning of the close and when I finish the close. Not to pander, but a genuine expression of gratitude. And I think people appreciate that, they accept it, and they work very hard to come to the right decision.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, that's an amazing result. That's a tough case. I know a lot of attorneys who wouldn't even take that case to start with, and you went in and did a great thing for the client. That's a great result. Tell us about some more of your cases. I know you have a bunch of crazy cases that we need to talk about. What about Roman versus U-Haul? I heard this was a very big, important case. Tell our listeners about that.
That case was also a referral. I mean, every case is a referral. That case
Yeah.
was a referral from a good friend of mine who's a great trial lawyer in his own right, Ted Wacker. I don't know. You might know him. If not, you might soon get to know him. He just reached out because he wanted another. Uh, he wanted. We tried a case together before, and he just said, I've been in this case too long. Maybe you can take a look. And I took a look at it. I will tell you, it was a pretty straight liability case. It was a head-on collision between a U-Haul, a vehicle operated by a U-Haul employee, and our client. But this is the bad fact. Our client weighed 500 pounds.
Oh, wow. Big dude.
And he had a shattered knee. He had two little boys in the back. They were at the time they were 4 and 6, but the boys weren't hurt. One had his elbow scraped. Sinan Roman had a shattered knee, suffered a fractured elbow, and a broken clavicle. The elbow had to be operated on. It needed a rod, and the knee had to be a tibular plateau fracture. It was fractured into like 17 pieces. The doctors did a good job putting it together. And that's all the case would have been, except that in the 6 months following Sinan's accident, the metal in his knee began to bend. So they had to do a revision surgery.
Because of his weight?
Yeah. Well, that's what the defense said. Well, they didn't say it that way. I'll tell you, you went right to it, and that's exactly what they wanted to defend is, and it was an interesting defense, but it ultimately didn't work. Sinan, has this damaged metal. They have to remove it. After the surgery to remove and replace the metal, he gets a bone infection called osteomyelitis. If you know what that is, it never goes away, right? Osteomyelitis, you got to be on antibiotics for life, and the bacteria starts to eat at the tissue from the inside out. So he was constantly having to get debridements. And so if you look at his knee, his massive leg, because he's 500 pounds, it had a big sort of gorge in it from all the tissue that had gone.
Yeah.
It was almost down to the bone. And the doctor said, you're never going to get this osteomyelitis out of control. You either have to be on antibiotics for life, but you can't because your body eventually develops immunity to it, so you're going to have to get it amputated.
Oh, my God.
Those things weren't really disputed. The defense came out and said, and his own doctor, I mean, this is what the defense was built on. The doctor in the surgical record said, patient failed to follow my instructions on keeping weight off his knee, and now he needs to get his metal removed.
And the doctor probably didn't want to get sued either, so he blamed the patient.
Exactly. But the story wasn't there. The story was this was during COVID. And again, discovering the story does so much. I went to this guy's home. He wasn't working anymore. I kid you not. He lived in an apartment maybe the size of a closet with his two boys. He was the sweetest man. I mean, he was just a sweet man, right? But he couldn't do anything. He couldn't walk anymore. He had to be on this large scooter. I spent time with the boys, and I saw them running around doing work. I discovered that the little boy has to wipe his dad's butt after he goes to the bathroom, after he defecates, because his knee won't bend in a way to allow him to do that for himself. He didn't have to do that before. I met an aunt of the boys. The mother was estranged, and the aunt begins to tell me all these stories about this man and how hard it was after he came from the hospital to take care of his kids because he was trying so hard, but it was COVID and he couldn't get help from anybody.
Right.
And so our story of liability was pretty straightforward. And the defense was admitting liability but wouldn't admit causation. They're saying, we're only responsible for the shattered knee. We're not responsible for anything else after 6 months of treatment. And they fought very hard. Before we went to trial, because I went and spent time there, and one thing I noticed is there was a lot of overweight people.
Yeah.
Just like in a lot of areas that are poor.
Right.
And so I wrote the defense lawyer an email. I sent them a demand for like $8 million when I got involved in the case. And they countered with what? Well, like 1.7. And I said, you're counting on the fat man defense, but I don't think you've been to this area and you haven't seen these people. You're going to be rejected and you're going to wind up paying me a lot more money.
Yeah.
They didn't respond. When I showed up for voir dire, there was another man that was the size of my client, and 3 or 4 people that was close to his size. And I just thought, they're counting on and this is a fat man defense, the bias defense against a really big guy who was literally 520 pounds. He was massive. I actually, listen to this, John, he didn't have clothes to wear. All he could wear was shorts. That's the only thing that he had. I went around LA to the big, there's some shops that cater to really big people. And the largest size made, I forget the number now, the largest size made is what fit him. And the shop told me they only had one, and just one pair of pants cost me $140.
No way.
But this is what I did with it. This is the drama, right? In the middle of trial, because I didn't want the jury to, first of all, I didn't have him in trial. I had him come in when I wanted him to come in. And then I had the expert, our expert, step off the stand. We brought the client in, and he, very carefully cut this trouser off the leg to show them this gruesome scene
No
of the
way.
chicken eaten away. And, the client, bless his soul, calls me after. He says, I haven't had pants in a long time. Do you think you can find me another pair? I said, with the amount of money you're going to get, whatever
Yeah.
pants
Yeah, right. Custom pants.
yeah.
Wow. So what did you find? Obviously, how did you deal with the fat man defense?
In voir dire, you know the Jerry Spence style of voir dire. It was sharing. I told him I told him about my bias. Look, I grew up around fitness. I spent time in the military, and I have to tell you that sometimes when I see really obese people, I come to judgments. I judge them, either gluttonous or lazy, and I'm ashamed of that. I know a lot of people who are overweight, who are very kind and better humans than I am, including my client. Does anyone else feel that way or have been impacted that way from social media, which always bombards us with these perfect people? Every hand goes up. Tell me about that. Tell me about that. Tell me about that. Well, I'm going to share with you, and you're going to hear from defense. He's 520 pounds. Do you feel like you could give him a fair trial as if he were some model from a magazine? Who has, as you sit here, who has some hesitation or some reservations about how my client looks and whether he was responsible for what happened to him because of his weight?
Right.
Right? And you know what that voir dire did is it forced the defense not to talk about his weight, but they focused very much on what the doctor said, that he didn't follow doctor's instructions. But the implication was there that you're just overweight and put weight on it, too much weight on it.
So what happened? What ended up happening in the case?
That was a $21.6 million verdict.
Wow. Do you think that the fat man defense backfired on the defense? In other words, it helped drive damages and make the people upset?
I think so. Look, my takeaway from that trial is always remain civil, even when the defense lawyers are being rude. And I remained civil. I remained respectful. I'd never tried a case in front of this judge. He didn't know me. After the first week into the case, when I made an objection based on, for example, in California, like many other jurisdictions, if the expert hasn't given you that opinion in a deposition, they can't give it to you in trial. It can't be a new one. And the objection in California is based on a case called Kennemer. So the first 2 or 3 times I made those objections, and they tried it a lot. I prepare for trial by getting all the opinions that have been asked and the citation, and I organize it very well for the judge, not for me. I already know what's been said. So each opinion is on a piece of paper. It's cited, and so the judge doesn't have to go looking through a deposition transcript. I hand it to him, and so if they believe they can support an opinion, it's on them to bring it up, right? So if I'm submitting an opinion, I already have what he testified to, and I give it to the judge. And so We went through 3 or 4. I was ready. The defense wasn't. They're flipping around. And then, I kid you not, I would say, Judge Kennemer, I'd raise the paper, and he says, sustained. He didn't need to go back and see it anymore.
Yeah.
As soon as he saw me raise the paper, he'd know that I was ready, and it was always sustained when I made the objection.
That's the credibility factor and being prepared. And
Yeah.
he knew. You know, I had a case that I tried this summer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in Kent County, Michigan, which used to be very conservative. I know you've had cases over there as well. It's not as conservative as it used to be, but they used the fat woman defense in my case. And my client wasn't even, I mean, she was a little bit chubby, but she wasn't overweight. She was hit by a Tuffy automobile driver. Tuffy is like a mechanic shop. You know, they do mufflers and stuff like that, like Muffler Man. Anyway, she was hit head on. She suffered a pretty serious fracture of her right ankle and her foot, which led to multiple fusion surgeries. And to my surprise, the defense attorney, his tact was, well, perhaps the reason she needed additional surgeries was because she's overweight. And so because she's overweight, she had more weight on the ankle compared to the average person. And because she had more weight on the ankle, she had to have these things. And I used it against him. I said, you know, how cruel can you be to my client that she had these surgery? She was hit head on by the at-fault driver doing nothing absolutely wrong. And now she's going to have her weight used against her in front of a bunch of strangers in a courtroom. I think it can backfire if you handle it correctly to, you know, although yours was obviously a lot more challenging, 500 pounds.
But you know, you say something important. I think we need to remind the listeners, you know, those lawyers that are trying cases, if you're going to do jury trials, you have to believe in the jury system. And it's a system that assumes that 12 people of the community together will overcome the individual biases that they have and make the right and just decision. And so for your case, for my case, you don't have to be overweight to know someone who's overweight, right?
Right.
You don't have to be overweight to know someone who struggles with weight. You don't have to be overweight to know someone who's just very kind, and maybe someone who's not kind. And so you're not going to be persuaded to base your decision on cruel arguments, as you framed them, about someone's weight when you have a clear violation of the law and you're trying to excuse it. It's a better defense to say, we're really sorry. You know, we're really sorry. This happened. I mean, I'm not going to go down that road, but you know what I'm talking about. There's no credibility in trying to use frivolous arguments about why someone didn't recover or whatever else. And I think that's the beauty of the jury system.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see it in weight. You know, they use somebody's weight, or they'll even use insidious arguments like, you know, this person's life isn't worth as much because, you know, they worked on a farm in the middle of Iowa as compared to making a lot of money in downtown Manhattan. You know, it goes the whole gamut of kind of cruel.
Well, on that one, let me you know, last year I tried a case, not the last one, for an immigrant who didn't speak English, was undocumented, and the jury in LA came back with a $22.6 million verdict.
What was that case?
This man was standing at a crosswalk, and light poles in LA and some in Michigan have these decorative caps. And apparently this cap came loose, fell. It weighs almost 2 pounds. It weighs 29 ounces. Okay, it fell and hit him in the head. It fractured his skull.
No way. Right? Just a random light.
Yeah, he's just standing waiting to cross. He pressed the button waiting to cross, and it falls and fractures the skull. He's kind of dazed. There's a school right behind him. He walks in, says, "Can you call the ambulance?" Or speaks Spanish to a guy who speaks Spanish. I'm hurt. Can you call the ambulance? The ambulance takes him to the hospital. They release him a couple hours later after they do a CT scan. It shows a fracture and no brain bleed. And so he goes home, begins to exhibit typical TBI symptoms that degrade over time, and it gets worse and worse. But this was during COVID, so we didn't have any work records, and he was a day laborer anyway. So I didn't put up any lost income or future capacity to earn. All I put up was a life care plan and asked for generals, and the jury gave us 596.
Wow. Over $22 million.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the potential bias of he's non-English speaking? Was he a citizen or no? Was he an immigrant?
He was undocumented. He was applying for papers, but he didn't have a green card, and he wasn't a citizen. He'd been in the country for a long time, and he was under some program, but he didn't have the official documentation yet.
So how did you deal with that? What did you do?
Can't bring it up.
Okay. You just brought it up anyways. And that's something that I've seen Nick do a lot. And even though you can keep something out, you just tell them anyways. So tell our listeners about that, how you approach this.
I mean, it's a law in California. You can't talk about someone's immigration status. But I found someone who I thought would be interested in the immigration status in the jury. And I said, my client doesn't speak English. And although the law says you're not allowed to inquire about his immigration status, some people feel like if you're in America, you should speak English. And if you don't, you probably shouldn't be here. Anyone feel that way? Boom. That guy's hand goes up. And I was talking to him. And I said, would you want to know if he's here legally or not? Oh, yes, I would. I don't want him to take our money. Blah, blah, blah. Thank you, sir. Anyone else interested in that information? And it just goes, Mr. Faraj, you can't go into that topic. You can't even consider it. Yes, I understand that, Judge, but I have a juror here who's wondering about it, Anyway, so I said, would you want to, is that something that you'd need to know before you could award, if I prove the case to you, before you could award a verdict to the plaintiff? Yes, I would. I couldn't do it if I didn't know if he was legal or not. Okay, and I think I was able to get rid of him on a cause challenge. But
yeah.
You as as a very beloved psychodramatist told me once, if you can't talk about it, it's already out of control, right? And so you should not avoid those things that scare you. You gotta. That's all you should be talking about in voir dire.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that was one of the hardest things for me. Because I remember before I went to Spence, before I hung around with Nick, I had tried a couple cases, and I was of the mind, I avoided all the things that scared me. Now I do the exact opposite. I start off with, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, these are the things I'm worried about the most in this case. Can we have an honest discussion about them and see if it might be a problem? And you feel better about it. And even just getting out there, being honest, it is so effective, I think.
It's an effective way in life also. I mean, if you have a problem with your, significant other, your family member, just come out and say it. Look, this is what I've got on my mind. What do you think?
Right.
The town that I tried the Sinan Romount case is Lancaster, Palmdale, which is the most rural part of LA County. I just came to.
Wow. Other than dealing with an voir dire, and this is interesting. I always struggle, and I think it is harder. It's harder to have a non-English speaking client. I tried a big case in Wayne County. My client was a Sikh from India. She was a Canadian citizen. She did not speak English. We had to use a translator, which obviously makes things a lot more difficult, and it takes out some of the emotion, I think. I was able to get a big verdict on that case because I was able to use some of her daughter, her family members who kind of became her voice. But one of my associates just tried a case in Wayne County, and he struggled with it. He had it was actually a Middle Eastern client, I believe, from Jordan, and she didn't speak English. Her husband didn't speak English, and they also had never worked in the country, and the defense used it against them. And so, how did you, in this case or others, what advice do you have if you have a client like this? What did you do? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's a great point for strategy. Let me say this. When you read a book, why is the memory of the book so much more vivid than the film? And I'll answer it. It's not rhetorical. Well, I guess it is rhetorical. Because it allows your memory to create the scenery, the imagery. It becomes yours rather than something that someone else created and now you're just a passive receiver, right?
Sure.
If you're talking about a good novel. And so less is more. And there's, this, the Soto case, which was the guy with the brain injury. We told the defense they could call our client. We're not going to call him. And I didn't call him. I called his priest. I called his wife. I called two of his neighbors. And I called one of his sons. That was my case. Because he was going to be a lousy witness.
Yeah.
He has a brain injury. Okay? And so
were you scared they were going to call him?
No, call him. And they could have called him, but it's easier. Then we get into sponsorship theory, right? If they call him and he doesn't do well, they sponsored that testimony. But if I call him and he doesn't do well, I sponsored that testimony.
Right.
So let them call him. There was not much he was going to say. He was just standing there and the thing hit him. He couldn't remember it, right?
Right.
He had no memory of it. We knew that it hit him because there was a piece of metal there. And liability was all kinds of issues on this case, right? There was a piece of metal that he assumed was what caused his fractured head, and he kept it. He held on to it. But by the time we got to trial, he didn't really remember, and there's nothing to remember. He was standing there, and suddenly he fell, right? And he had a fracture in his skull. As far as his day-to-day activities, he really wasn't doing much. He wasn't bullshitting. He was just literally sitting at home. He degraded to an extent that his wife had to take care of him full time, right? But this is the challenge in the case, is when they did the CT scan on that day, the doctor said there's significant atrophy in his brain. And the defense took that and ran with it, and we know that you and I know the science. Your brain doesn't atrophy immediately from a blow. It takes time. And so
Right.
What they said was, he was already down this road to sort of, it's a type of dementia that he had. And they said, based on the brain imaging, there was already so much shrinkage of the brain, so much atrophy, that it was well on its way. And this didn't accelerate anything or do anything. It was nothing more than a blow to the head. But going back to the point, look, less is more. You don't have to put your client on for an hour or 30 minutes, 10 minutes on and off. Let the defense deal with it. You train them to answer well, and then let the defense deal with it.
Yeah. All right. I'm getting we're close to time. Look, let's go to one more of your cases. I love talking to you. You have very interesting cases. You're at the top of your game on this. You can really connect with people. Tell us about, is it the Tillinghast case? Am I saying that correctly?
Tillinghast.
Yeah. Tell us about it.
This was also last year. It was a wrongful death case. This young man, 13-year-old boy at school, he has a heart condition that no one knows about.
Where is it? Where is this case?
In L.A., Los Angeles County. And he collapses. The teachers run to him. They begin to perform CPR. Ambulance arrives like 13 minutes after he collapses. They transfer him to hospital, but he's brain dead by that point.
Oh,
and when they're working on him, when they're doing the autopsy, they realize that the thickness of his heart, I shit you not, is 5.5 centimeters. his heart wall is 5.5. I'm sorry. 5.5 centimeters, 550 millimeters, 2.75 inches. His heart wall thickness. The average heart wall is half an inch, and
Oh,
so that was a
wow.
big. They had three doctors saying there's nothing that could have been done for this boy. My theory was they should have used an AED,
Like the
and they had an
paddles.
AED, but the teachers didn't know about it.
And that's
Um,
like the defibrillator, right? The paddles,
yeah,
essentially.
the defibrillator. And for all your listeners, by the way, if you have children in sports, CPR doesn't do anything. Children don't suffer heart attacks. The chest compressions is for heart attacks. Children suffer cardiac arrest, which means they need the defibrillators. That's what brings children back. If you watch some YouTube videos, you'll see some kids playing volleyball or whatever. They collapse, they shock them, they sit back up. CPR doesn't do anything. And so that was our theory in the case is these teachers were all trained on CPR, including AED, but you didn't tell them there was an AED in the school. And there was an AED in the school. And so I sued the LA Unified School District, and the jury came back with $50 million verdict. You
Wow.
talk about a damages story. I put the client on. I didn't put the mom on. She was too distraught. You couldn't talk to her. Rightfully so. She lost her child. I put the dad on for, I kid you not, 15 minutes. I showed him 5 photos. One of him at the hospital when his child is born. One of them traveling together when the boy was like 2 years old. One when they were building a computer together. One at like a dinner. And one at the hospital when the boy died. The final scene. The first scene was at the hospital. The last scene was at the hospital. He was
Wow.
on 15 minutes. I put no other damages witnesses. I asked the jury for 15, and they gave us 15.
Wow, that's an amazing result. Why? Tell us your strategy on why no other damage witnesses and why the less is more approach.
Yeah, it's a lost child. Really need? I mean, the less it's a lost. When I did the focus groups, I didn't ever present the dad, and I did a number of focus groups. All I had to tell the focus group participants is a lost child, and the relationship was good. Of course, it's good. It's a 13-year-old, and so their imaginations begin to run to their own children, to their 10-year-old and 11-year-old and 13-year-old children. It doesn't go to the adult children. It always goes to the memories of when they were young. And so
Right.
why would they fill in the space of some lousy experience when they have their own experience to connect to? And then that pushed up the damages. That was the theory behind that, and I think it worked.
That's amazing. That's an amazing result. You're an amazing attorney and friend. And we're excited. You know, we talked with Nick Rowley on a podcast of I don't remember, a couple shows ago about coming to Michigan, and I am so happy to announce that you have accepted our invite. You're going to be coming back to your hometown. And you're going to be a speaker at the Michigan Trial Lawyers Summit, which we are putting on with some of the best and brightest, yourself included, on June 20th and 21st, right here in Detroit, Michigan, downtown Detroit. And we're very excited for you to come. For lawyers out there, you can register at MTL Summit, SUMMIT.com. And we're really excited, Haytham, to have you come and be a speaker at the program with some of the other best lawyers in the country. I hope you're pumped.
I am, John. There's no way I'd miss it. It's in Michigan, man.
I can't wait to see you. I made a dinner reservation. I know our last dinner did not work out, so I have another dinner reservation for us that I am going to be compelling you to come on. We're going to go to Layla's. We're going to have a great time. And I can't
Looking forward
wait
to it.
to see you, dude. And thank you for all your work. Thank you for coming on the show. And thank you for all the humanitarian work that you're doing. You know, you don't just give lip service to doing the right thing. You're out there every day doing the right thing, which not a lot of others people can say.
John, thank you for having me. You're a brother. I'm glad I was able to come on. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, everybody. This has been an amazing episode of Cases Gone Wild with my friend and brother, Haytham Faraj, who's an amazing attorney. If you or someone you know needs help, you want to get connected to Haytham, or you want to learn more about some of the things we talked about today, you can check us out at markolaw.com, markolaw.com. Please also make sure to share this if you liked our show with your friends, relatives, loved ones. Give us some love. Give Haytham some love. Give Marko Law some love. We'll see you next time in another 2 weeks on another exciting episode of Cases Gone Wild.